This episode is sponsored by Dr. Chrono by EverHealth, the #1 mobile all-in-one EHR. Built specifically for medical practices, Dr. Chrono includes an integrated feature that powers a seamless payments acceptance experience. Dr. Chrono Payments offers multiple ways for patients to pay as well as insurance credit card processing. As a Dr. Chrono customer, you can easily activate our fully integrated payment solution that will streamline your cash flow and help you get paid anytime from anywhere. Deliver the best patient experience with a fast and easy way to collect payments. Visit drchrono.com/payments. That's drchrono.com/payments to learn more about Dr. Chrono today. Is there a DPC clinician, tech vendor, or industry champion that goes above and beyond to further elevate the DPC movement? Nominate them for a DPC Innovation Award to recognize them for creating traction, embracing innovation, and demonstrating commitment to the movement. DPC Innovation Award winners will be announced and honored at this year's Hint Summit, taking place in Denver, Colorado, September 27th through 28th. Nominate a DPC innovator at summit.hint.com, plus get $50 off your Hint Summit 2024 registration with promo code MyDPCStory. A note about today's episode. There is some language that may be inappropriate for young listeners, so please consider this as you listen today. Thanks for tuning in. Direct primary care is an innovative, alternative path to insurance-driven healthcare. Typically, a patient pays their doctor a low monthly membership and, in return, builds a lasting relationship with their doctor and has their doctor available at their fingertips. Welcome to the My DPC Story podcast, where each week you will hear the ever-so-relatable stories shared by physicians who have chosen to practice medicine in their individual communities through the direct primary care model. I'm your host, Marielle Conception, family physician, DPC owner, and former fee-for-service doctor. I hope you enjoy today's episode and come away feeling inspired about the future of patient care, direct primary care.
To me, DPC is freedom. Freedom to practice with integrity and authenticity. Freedom that lets my patients be their whole, full, authentic selves without fear of judgment. Freedom to develop real, lasting relationships and practice medicine the way it should be. I'm Dr. Vicky Borgia of Radiance Medical Group, and this is my DPC story.
Dr. Vicky Borgia is a board-certified family medicine physician with over 20 years of experience. She practices womb-to-tomb medicine with special interests in training in reproductive health, LGBTQIA health, and integrative medicine. She earned a BA in Women's Studies from Columbia University at the dawn of intersectionality and an MD from SUNY Brooklyn, aka Downstate. She completed her residency at UCSF Sutter Medical Center in Santa Rosa, California, and attended a faculty development fellowship in addressing the health needs of the underserved at UCSD. She holds her board certification from the American Board of Family Medicine and the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine. She opened Radiance Medical Group in the fall of 2019. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Borgia.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start off our interview with this quote that you had said during a TV interview that you had for a local TV station during the pandemic. And it just really hit home given your clinic and where it is. And we'll talk about that. But the quote was, "We are part of the community. And in times like this," referring to the pandemic, "the community has to come together to take care of each other." So I wanted to frame this whole interview with that quote and start with asking how you ended up being a community direct primary care physician, opening up Radiance Medical Group in Philly.
So I've always been a community physician, not always a direct primary care community physician. Most of my career has been in federally qualified health centers or lookalikes or things like that. And I actually went into medicine thinking that that would be how my activism came to fruition, by empowering communities to take control of their health. That was naive and a little like caught up in the medicalization of the time. But so my goal has always been to be part of the community. and to be, in that old fashioned way that, oh yeah, we can call or we can drop by or we can talk. And I did have the interesting experience of opening up basically 2 months before a pandemic. So, it changed a lot of how I do things. And at that time, the reason I'm on there is I actually had a ton of little hand sanitizer swag, and there was no hand sanitizer anywhere then. And I was giving it away. I gave it to the rec center near me, the schools, people who needed it, my neighbors came by. So like once that came out, I basically like had a distribution center for little tiny, whatever 2-ounce bottles of hand sanitizer.
That's awesome though. I mean, that is completely an unexpected way to use swag. And
exactly.
to be able to have swag be your marketing reach in the community. And the fact that, they even showed you in the news feature, which is also on Dr. Borgia's blog on mydpcstory.com, handing out that sanitizer to a woman on the street. So that's amazing. Never underestimate the power of swag.
Exactly. I had a recent experience just like that too at Pride in Philly, where I gave out probably 500 things of sunscreen. All gone. Every single one of them gone.
I'm sure all the listeners can relate to being handed some kind of swag, but what makes your swag stand out?
Well, I guess timing, right? My swag stuck out at Pride because I realized I tabled with Elise, who's a physical therapist that I work with quite a bit. And we had sunscreen, lip balm, condoms, and water. And I was like, oh my God, we're like the protection station.
Awesome. I think about that. That's way more fun swag than, you see on Physician Appreciation Day or whatever the huge systems have. So, mentioning that, I want to go back to your early days before you opened Radiance. What was life like when you had, graduated from medical school and were working as an employed physician?
So, I've been in medicine for a long time. I've had a lot of jobs. I'm basically unemployable at this stage. I started working right out of residency at a FQHC that I did locums or, filled in, moonlit for when I was a resident. And that was amazing. That was mostly immigrant farm workers in the La Uba because it was Sonoma County. Mm-hmm. And so I started there, and then I wanted to move back east. So I moved to Philadelphia after a few years out in Sonoma County and started working also for an FQHC here. But honestly, by that point, I had sort of had it with the disempowering nature of all FQHCs. I was joking about one of them, there was a plaque, and I was like, we should change this to say disempowering patients and providers since 1975. So I have been in many, many situations. Lots of them are FQHCs, mostly the churn and having to see so many patients just wore me out. You go in with great ideals and thinking this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to change the world. And then you're basically beaten down by the volume of patients you need to see. One day I actually saw, I think, 30 patients before lunch.
Jeez.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, and this was my neighborhood, in my neighborhood. So the FQHC, like I'd see these people at the park and at the store and they'd be like, oh, hey, doctora, blah, blah, blah. And I thought like I could run them over and not remember that I had just seen them, I absolutely thought that. I was like, oh yeah, I wouldn't know who you were. And that made me think I have to leave there, basically.
It's so interesting to hear you share earlier about how you've always been a community physician and then recently a DPC community physician. And it makes me think about how yourself, myself, many physicians on this podcast have shared that common thread of we had that naivety, that desire to change the world in our own local communities. And then we get into employed practice, insurance-based practice, and we realize that that's not in alignment with what our initial goals were. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask there, when you left, the Sonoma area, when you left this FQHC in the East Coast, how did you start reflecting on that your positions that you were hired in were not in alignment with your desire to practice as a community physician?
I learned it painfully time and time again. I did the whole I'm going to change jobs business. So after that FQHC, I actually worked at a residency, which I found very fulfilling, but also insane, as it is. And then I had a ton of director titles there with no extra time to do any of it. And the final straw there was actually when I was like, okay, you have me as the director of resident wellness, but you give me zero time to do this. And so I am not actually modeling anything great. So, and they're like, yeah, we can't do that. I'm like, all right, fine. So I think, moral injury became a term how many years ago? I was doing a lot of work with myself on compassion fatigue, on trauma stewardship, secondary trauma, things like that, trying to keep myself sane. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. So then I had an opportunity after the internship to work at the local LGBT health center. And then very shortly after starting there, I realized that things were very not right there. And that's kind of when I started making my plans for exit of the system. And I really just, like, when I was there, I was like, okay, if this is really not going to work, then probably none of this is going to work.
When you were making your exit strategy, had you already learned about DPC at that point?
So yes and no. So I did read that article so long ago in the AAFP about the DPC that was, half. I find the terms they used and still do to this day extremely problematic, as I do a lot of that clinic. However, the idea is good, right? That it was half sponsor, half whatever they call it. And I thought, okay, this might be something that I can do. And I could, do things on my own terms, right? And then I found, God, who knows, what year is it even? I don't remember what year because I hate social media, but I went on, I learned about DPC more, went to a few of the CME things. And then I had to get over a lot of my own fear about starting a business, learning those things. And also I had a huge burnout and divorce and all of that stuff in the meantime. So part of me was just surviving and making money to pay for the divorce lawyers and keep my kids and their sports equipment and shit like that. So that took a lot of time out. But then once I really realized I just can't do this anymore, then I said, I have to do something different. And honestly, my choices were leave medicine, leave the world, or do DPC.
Wow.
And my mom, who is an amazing person, who's 90 now, who worked in advertising in the 50s and went to college, had to leave, is super smart. She said too, like, just do it. Do it. If you fail, so what? You'll never regret failing. You'll always regret not trying. And she was going to take out home equity on her house and things like that. But I was like, no, I'm not going to have you do that. So I just busted my ass in urgent care instead. Yeah.
When you talk about that fear that you had overcome, especially with this, new proposition, it's either you try or you regret not trying. What were the steps you took financially in addition to urgent care and also educating yourself in all of the business about being a CEO to run your own clinic? How did you go from that place of fear to then putting actionable steps in place?
So part of me did not have a choice because honestly, I would leave medicine otherwise. Mm-hmm. So that's where it was like, okay, learn it, don't learn it. And then I thought about all the things we learn in med school and residency that I never wanted to know. I still really don't want to know. But I learned it and I know how to do it, right? So medicine and being a parent, you get really good at doing a lot of shit you don't want to do and learning things you don't want to learn and doing all that. I was like, all right, I can learn this. I don't want to, but whatever. I can figure it out. And if I can't figure it out, I can hire people to figure it out for me, right? So I don't have a lot of business experience or sense. But I do have friends, and they have practices. I have a lot of therapist friends, and they figured out how to do it themselves. And I just assumed I'm still figuring it out. Like I just started paying myself last October. I honestly did not know how to pay myself. I didn't know how to do quarterly taxes. But I was like, you know what, I'll just do it. And what's going to happen? Like if I get fined or caught or anything, I'll pay fees. What are they going to do? Right.
It makes me think of the phrase, it takes a village, because it really represents that. What you've shared really represents how there is a community of people who have gone before us. Right. And that if you don't know something, you can hire someone. I love that. You can also ask, and you can learn. We definitely are learners because of the fact that we are able to go to medical school, graduate residency, and become physicians. So I love that.
Think about how, and I am so old, we didn't look things up on UpToDate. We looked things up in books. When I was working at Alianza in Healdsburg, we had so many people coming from Mexico with meds and things like that. We had this raggedy old, I don't even think it had a cover, Mexican PDR that we were always leaping through to try to figure out what this med was. So I go back to those sorts of things and be like, yeah, if I could do that, I could do this, I still don't know how to do a lot of things. And I have a new accountant person, and I did some business coaching this year. Awesome. The other thing about being a physician, we know how to triage, right? So I know how to do the things that need to be done because they need to be done. It might be the last minute, whatever, but I can do it because I know that those are the things that I absolutely need to do, right?
Yeah, I love that. And it's very, very true. Yeah. Now, when you were realizing this is what I'm going to do next, and this is what I'm going to try, did you envision your practice in Philly? What were the parameters that you wanted to build out as you were dreaming your DPC?
So yes, I never wanted to go anywhere but Philly. I wanted a place I could walk to or take public transportation. I wanted to actually have a place. So my initial target populations were queer and trans folk, fat people who have been abused by the system, activists, immigrants, and then I joke, I say wealthy white liberals who are wealthy, guilty white liberals who can pay for everybody. Honestly, that is what my patient population is, gotta say. So it really worked out. When I went to Nuts and Bolts, I felt really excluded, really not a part of that. Really thought oh my God, DPC, this is not for me because this is not a community that I feel safe in. There was so much white bro action going on. I was shamed on social media for pointing that out by people who were, got power from being close proximity to white male power, right? We know how that goes in the world. And I really thought I'm not going to do this because I can't. And at the same time, such a generous group of people give all their resources, but I really didn't feel safe. But I did find my people there. And I thought okay, I can still do this. And I knew in my heart that these are populations that need to be served. They need to be served in much better ways than the, standard corporate medical churn them in, churn them out is doing.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you to Spruce Health for supporting the My DPC Story podcast. The ways we communicate have changed dramatically over the past decades, but technology and tools in healthcare have not kept pace. Patients want more access and digital convenience, as well as the ability to text their care teams. Care teams are inundated with more communication and rising expectations, but are still using tools and technology stuck in prior decades. Spruce Health created a solution for the tech-forward DPC practice by creating a communication product designed to serve both the patient and the doctor through intuitive HIPAA-compliant workflows, tagging, scheduled messages, and triage templates ready for use, whether you're on your phone or in the exam room. New users get 20% off for the first 12 months of a paid plan with code MARYAL20. That's MARYAL20. So check out Spruce Health today at sprucehealth.com or check out the link in the show notes.
Absolutely. And for me, I see when we look at the marginalized populations, whether that be LGBTQIA plus, whether that be immigrants who are undocumented, for me, I look at what we're lacking in their healthcare. That's where we need to fix, because clearly those are the most broken parts of the system sometimes. Yeah. And so when we fix those pieces of access to quality healthcare, timeliness of care, when we look at how those things are broken and how to fix that, the people who have the mediocre care can definitely benefit, but especially those people who are marginalized, they can especially benefit. So absolutely. I think that's wonderful that the margins were your core,
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I absolutely targeted medically disenfranchised people. Yeah, I mean, wonderful. I have the privilege of, living in this place for a while, having worked in many different settings here, all the settings that I was aiming for, and having done activism too. So there's ways that I didn't need to do a lot of advertising and things like that, because I saw what the need was.
And you became, like you said, that community DPC physician who built your practice around your community. So wonderful. Now, when you opened Radiance Medical Group, Camille Thompson was with you. So did you open the practice together, or did you open it and hire her?
No, we opened together and we were co-owners, split in different ways because I had more money from busting my ass in urgent care. So we did open together, and at the time we opened, that's when she was working in student health. And then there was so much turmoil with Hahnemann closing and Drexel and Tower and whatever the hell it is now. And she could not stay at that job, and she had to get another job. And it couldn't work out for her. At that point, I was working urgent care. So I had much more available time in the office and to do outreach and things like that. She did a little bit, but I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. So
we all remember what those lockdown times were like. And I want to ask, when you talk about opening with Camille, and how even just the finances were different because of what you brought to the table, I think about my conversation with your neighbors in Pennsylvania out in Pittsburgh about how Dr. Lynn and Dr. Gentili, were talking about how to evaluate a relationship, just like a marriage, when you're entering into a business relationship. So I wonder, when you guys were having the conversation about opening Radiance, what it would look like, how the financials would look like, do you have any words of wisdom for those people in the audience who might be thinking about a partnership at the initial opening of a DPC?
Right. So we opened, originally we thought it would be 50-50. And then in terms of how, the seed money we needed and what we needed to do and our time in the office, it turned out to be much different than that. So we changed it. We were able to look at what we each contributed and changed for that. I was fine doing 50-50, to be quite honest with you, because I come from a place of much more financial privilege than Camille. And, doing equity in the company, it's fine by me because I come from a white middle-class family who were able to, in our country, have intergenerational wealth. I say that in quotes because, wealth is quite different than what we talk about with intergenerational wealth. But I had a mother who was going to do a home equity loan. That is something that not everyone has. Sure. The reason I have that is because my parents were able to move out to Long Island from New York City in the 60s where it was redlined, right? Like there was things that happened that I was able to do because of my privilege, economic, racial privilege, that Camille is not able to do. And so that doesn't mean that we are not equal partners in this. It just means that I had more privilege going into it, right? She didn't feel great about that, whatever. We changed it according to that. But the thing that made me change it more in terms of changing like our shareholder agreement was the time, because I was putting in so much time here. And so I would think about all of those factors, right? Like it's not just the amount of money you have, but how did you get that money? How did other people get it, right? You don't want to continue the same injustices, like perpetuate that same injustice, especially if you're trying to build something that is working towards more equality in the world, right?
Sure.
So yeah, but it was hard. And honestly, the fact that she couldn't work as much as I could, I did start to resent it, because I was just like, I'm drowning and I need help. And she was unable to help me. And in the end, we were like, if we want to be friends, I was like, you can stop. And when your life is at a better place where you can start building a panel or seeing patients, then come back.
How did you guys work contractually or legal wise to be able to allow that freedom for her to come if you needed to take time? How did you work that in?
Well, we had a shareholders agreement that was done through the lawyer. I don't know if this is a good example though, because really the pandemic happened. I was working urgent care. She was working palliative care. Our lives sucked, right? Like both of our lives were terrible. It just depended when and what point, which one was worse. And so we had very little bandwidth for things, so we were just like running, doing what we need to. And then when we reevaluated, that's when I said, do you think you could do anything? Like, do you want to do any part? Do you want to change the percentages that we have going on? And, she wasn't able to do it at this point in her life right now.
Yeah. Gotcha. And in terms of when she stepped away from Radiance Medical Group, what happened to her patients? Did they all transfer to you?
She had a few patients and they did transfer to me, but it wasn't so much that it was like a burden or anything. We would have had a different conversation if that was the case.
Gotcha. And in terms of the patients that she did have, were any of those employer groups?
No, but that was going to be her job because she is much more extroverted than I am. We were going to go. I live in an amazing part of Philly, right? Full of immigrant populations, very diverse, lots of restaurants, really great stuff, right? And we were in the spring of 2020, we're going to go to restaurants and pitch employee benefits for that. And that just did not happen.
Definitely. And what about now, with you refocusing on you as the solo practitioner, do you now plan on going back out to, South Street or all of the restaurants that are around you guys?
At some point, yes. But I have a very large waiting list.
Okay.
So I don't feel like I should go out and pitch things right now. Yeah. My actual struggle is to grow in a way that's sustainable and doesn't make me crazy, But I do think it's a great option. It's an amazing option for places around here too, right? It's a great option for people who possibly are undocumented. Their only healthcare option is for sitting for 12 hours in the FQHC. Half of them I already know because I work there.
Yeah.
And then, so that is one option that I think is good and I'm willing to do. And now I have like word of mouth about nonprofits and things like that. So businesses kind of come to me and I have to decide like how we're going to do things.
Yeah. So let's go into that a little bit more with regards to, you opened in October of 2019. And when you mentioned you have a very long wait list, I'm so happy for you in terms of that must, alleviate and heal some of those fears that you had initially, like you talked about. But when you were open in October of 2019, how was your growth? Did you grow quickly early on? And when did you reach your number that you wanted to create the waitlist at?
Yeah. So no, I grew okay early on. Like I could pay my rent and overhead probably by, oh my God, time is so weird. My urgent care job was cutting all our hours, all that stuff. And so I did a 2-week stint at the border refugee camp in Matamoros. So when was that? May? I was in Mexico when I covered my rent, when I realized I covered my overhead.
Wow.
So that was probably like May of 2020. But I have a very low overhead because I was so excited about that. I remember sending people texts and stuff like, oh, look, I just looked at Hint and I made my rent. I made my this. So that was easy. And then I grew. There were a lot of things that I did at the beginning that I don't do now, but that also helped. So when the pandemic hit, I did pay what you can visit. And I did get a lot of members from that also, but I got like just money. And I was doing medical marijuana certifications, also pay what you can, honestly. And so those helped out at that point. And I was actually, at that moment, I wasn't living in fear, like in a fear-based model. Later, I did a little bit because I was just doing some locums and things like that before getting another job. So I hired these marketer people that my friend used. That's how I got to be in like one of the finalists for Be Well Philly. Because
nice.
Do it. Yeah. It's terrible.
Awesome.
I had to like do all this shit and put myself out on social media all the time and say, vote for me, which was terrible. So that happened. So I did have, and then I grew again. And then I started working for different urgent care. And I was growing at a nice clip. And oh God, when was it? Last year, May? I had to do I had to start a wait list because I could not sustain that working two full-time jobs. One was terrible. I wanted to keep my practice open and growing because it is actually what kept me going, right? My vaccination rate in my clinic is 99.9% probably. And that was very helpful at that time. So I did have to, I stopped because I couldn't actually grow in a way that I could take care of people. The point of my vaccination rate being 99% was I was working in urgent care in central Pennsylvania, where I was basically harassed and harangued by people all day.
Wow.
Who were being tested for a disease they did not believe in and were telling me how they refused to be vaccinated. So my own practice of very community-minded activists who were eager to get vaccinated and protect each other.
Yeah.
Was the thing that actually kept me going.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Have you tried an AI scribe in your clinic? Well, I've tried so many, and I can say Heidi Health is the best AI scribe I have come across thus far. With Heidi Health, I can create unlimited customizable templates for my notes to help me truly cut down on the time I'm spending charting. Template for pediatric well child check? Done. Template for weight loss management? Done. Some of my favorite things I've built into my AI template, beyond the general soap note, are having a list of actionables for our team to take after a patient visit, having the diagnoses listed, and creating an after-visit summary for our patients. Not only have I found Heidi Health to be the most helpful, customizable AI scribe so far, it's also more affordable than most out there. So try Heidi Health today and see how you can harness the power of an AI scribe for your practice. To get an entire month of Heidi Pro free, go to the homepage of mydpcstory.com and click on the Heidi Health ad.
And I can totally see that, because where childhood vaccination rates and support for vaccines for preventative illnesses is one thing, I definitely can say that the stress of COVID and the politics and the personal beliefs we've seen it definitely brought a different level of stress to physicians that we hadn't seen in a very long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the thing that got to me, because we were talking about being the community doctor.
Yeah.
was that these things are available, and yeah, maybe you won't get sick, and maybe you won't be hospitalized, and maybe you won't die. But the person who is doing chemo who lives on your block, or the HIV positive person who lives on your block, or the otherwise immunosuppressed or sick person, if they get it, yeah. So I think it's an incredibly ableist view we have now, that we should all just go live life because only the sick are going to get it.
Yeah.
The sick count, right? They're part of our community and they count. Right? There's extreme poverty and extreme segregation in Philadelphia, right? So, and I've worked in places where people were desperately poor and did not have access to things. I mean, some of my patients right now are desperately poor, and it changes how you practice and it changes what you do. And so I think that never actually losing sight of that is very important.
I want to ask there how you had pivoted in your own practice to be able to offer pay what you can. So can you talk about how that works into the DPC business model during this amazing pandemic, where everything goes as long as your patients are safe and you're safe and you're able to continue keeping the lights on? How, that's the utmost importance, but it also matters as to how the money does come in so that you're able to take care of those bills and your other patients. So how did that all work in your membership and your DPC?
So that's an interesting question, because I opened really right before the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a nice patient panel as the pandemic started, and they were pretty diverse, right? Economically. A lot of my patients actually were sex workers, because it got out through some, I don't know, listserv or whatever, that I was a place to go, and I was sex worker affirming, and I could give them care without judgment and things like that. So when the pandemic hit, even before we were all on lockdown and travel stopped, sex workers actually lost a ton of their income, right? So service industry, sex workers, but sex workers were actually probably the first people that we noticed that their income would just like ground to a halt. So I had sent out something to my patient panel saying, okay, like unprecedented times, just let me know what you want to do. If you need to change your membership rate or things like that, please let me know. I also didn't know it was going to grind on for so long. So that actually restored my faith in humanity, because some people did ask to go down, but I actually got a ton of money from my other patients. Like, people just gave me money. I was like, okay, great, thanks.
Wow.
I'll take your money. Right? Yeah. I also, at that point, was still working in my urgent care job. So I had the privilege of doing these things because I had an income that was coming in. I mean, I still do it now, and this is my only job, but I worked it out in a different way. So like, my fee structure originally was sort of like that the people who could pay the full fee would always supplement the people who couldn't pay. And so there was some of that, but a lot of this was, I was able to do this because I also had another like full-time paying job that I knew I was getting a paycheck.
I love that you mentioned this experience, because one of the most common things I get from people outside of the DPC community is, oh, that's still for rich people. I mean, just like how you're sharing about how the people with more means can also contribute on a normal basis to the people who might not have the financial means, this month or for a few months to be able to pay for your services. I think that's so important, because for those people, especially who are wanting a practice designed with the core of their patient panel, the similar to yours, that's a way to strategize how to do pricing from the get-go.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting, because I am about to send out something about raising my rates. And I am working very hard to figure out, I'm going to have a mutual aid part of this, right? So I'm a big believer in mutual aid. Actually, mutual aid is the only thing that got a lot of communities by during the pandemic. It still is, right?
Well, it's just like the formula shortages. I mean, people are coming together to
So mutual aid is a long-standing tradition in activist and marginalized communities, right? We've always done it. I had a community fridge outside of my office for a long time, and you could really see like that was a great example of mutual aid done right. Right.
Yeah.
And even my thing, even though I didn't set it up as this is mutual aid, people got it.
Mhm.
And so for every person who said, oh, I do need a reduction in my fees, I did have people who gave me more money. I did have people who did that. And my patients who maybe were furloughed at the beginning of the pandemic, who then got reemployed and things like that, wrote to me and were like, okay, I can go back up. I was like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Like that totally restored my faith in humanity. So like I went into this thinking like I am not good, like I don't want to do a sliding scale because I don't want to be the person who looks at people's W-2s and bills.
Sure.
And we all know that your income does not necessarily say whether or not you are financially struggling or not, right? All of us who graduate med school with whatever $300,000, $400,000 in loans, we know that that's not necessarily the case. You could be making a lot of money, but not actually have a lot of income. So that I never wanted to do that. So my philosophy has always been, you can tell me what you can do. And I'm also just gonna be okay with that and assume that you are telling me to the best of your knowledge what you think is affordable.
Mhm.
When that changes, you will also tell me, right? I don't want to go into this thinking like, oh, somebody's so rich and they're going to try to lowball me on that. I mean, I could, but I don't want to live in a world as that's true. So I have found that it really has been true that people, especially during the pandemic, they were laid off, they weren't making money, then they got a new job. And then some people who got new jobs were so grateful that we held them through during that time. Now they're sponsoring somebody else, like all of that.
It's just really clear, just with you sharing up to this point, how when you have said that your faith in humanity was restored, I can clearly feel that just from envisioning your patients helping each other out, you helping your patients out. And it's just amazing because I don't necessarily hear that from my fee-for-service colleagues.
Oh, God, no, because we're not involved in it either, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, like you just mentioned, the price, the upping in price is going to come. And have you mentioned this to people in the DBC community and have been made to feel guilty about raising prices?
I do not go on those groups anymore.
Yeah.
I limit my social media in DPC for that reason. I do not need somebody telling me that my price is too high or you can't raise prices or things like that, because trust me, I grew up Catholic and I have a lot of guilt to begin with. So I don't need outside people doing that. I have a lifetime of growing up in the Catholic Church that helps me with that, right? So they can say all they want. I am going to raise my prices to reflect what I do and actually give a formal mutual aid option, right? So right now I do it on like I don't know, these people are paying more, these people are paying less. And part of that has to do with the fact that I really did just quit urgent care in November. So I haven't had like a good look at things. But I think that an actual mutual aid option that I could track in my books and things like that would be very helpful. Like I was so, this is another naive thing. I thought like, okay, I'll mark up my meds and that will go into a fund for people who can't pay for meds. But like marking up wholesale meds is like, whatever, 1 penny. I'm not doing that. Like, I don't have the brain power to do that. That's some Office Space stuff, right? That movie.
Oh, yeah.
They make $1 million off of like percentages of pennies, but I'm not working at that volume. So there was I was like, my labor of figuring that out is so worth so much more than actually doing that. So now I'm just like, all right, I'll just hope that washes out. Right. But for memberships, I am going to do it to see like, if people want to pay an extra mutual aid part of that, I have to talk to Hint about this to see how I do this. But
and that's actually where my next question is going, because when you have membership plus mutual aid, how do you manage that? Do you manage it all through Hint, or are you doing a mutual aid through one option and membership through Hint?
No, I want to do it all through Hint. Right now, I do it all through Hint, and I just increase families' memberships or people's memberships. But that doesn't help me in terms of like breaking it out and looking at how much of it is that, right? So that's my goal.
Sure. And I wonder if in Hint because you're able to process individual charges. That could be durable medical equipment, that could be medication, whatever. I wonder if it's just added on as an extra fee for however long the family wishes to add that to their membership.
Right. Like that's how I'm doing it now, but I don't have it in as that. And I want people to be able to choose that without me doing it, which is the issue. So like pay what you can visits through Hint. Originally I could do them and then they got rid of that. So like they'd have to tell me and it was weird. I just want people to do it and then I could see it later.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense, especially so you could be able to track that because I assume that, today or in the future might be listening to this podcast and saying, I want to reach out to Dr. Borgia.
So people are listening to this and they want to ask me about it. Give me 2 good months and I'll tell you what I figured out.
Love it. I want to shift a little bit and get more into the tech of your practice. With you mentioning that time is valuable, your time is valuable, and you value your time. I want to ask what were the thoughts around tech in your clinic? We're talking EMR, we're talking onboarding. What was your strategy in terms of harnessing tech to make your practice work for you and your patients?
Okay. I like that though, because it really does come back to the sticky note I have on my Dymo printer that says, I respect my time, which was my mission statement.
Great. It's great.
Good. So sorry, I totally tangent.
No worries.
Heck, here's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I use Hint to register. The reason I use Hint is actually because they had much better Soji type things when you registered for it. So I use Serbo as my EMR. And at the time I started, the way you would register in that was very clunky. And it was almost like, what is your sex? And that's defined at birth, or what is your gender? And that was defined at birth. And we need this because of labs. And I was like, ugh, that sounds terrible. So I'm not going to use that. Hint had a much more fluid option. So I used that to register. I did not use Spruce until this last year, probably in the summer of last year. But I think Spruce is actually something that is really pays for itself and more. The idea that people can text me and call me and not be on my personal cell phone, and I can put tags on it, and I can, the most important and the thing I am not that great on is to put my out of office memo on. I'm going to upgrade to the other premium to actually have that happen without me remembering to have to do it. But that has been one of the best things I recently learned through DPC Women about how to spend things in the future, which I am embarrassed to say I didn't know. So that has actually been pretty good. I tried it twice. I still think I need to not look at Spruce because my message clearly says if this is a medical emergency or urgency, like emergency, go to the ER. A medical urgency, call on the phone because it will ring through, but I won't have notifications at night or on the weekends. So I still want to not look at it to protect my time, but I do, obviously. So that I think is amazing. And then I use Serbo. I like their intake forms. There are some things I would like to change about it, but I honestly have not had the time to sit down and try to figure that out. And then most of my patients, honestly, are pretty tech savvy. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot online. I do have to talk to people as much as I don't like to, but there's some people who can't actually get themselves to make the appointments, or they want to talk when they get on the wait list. They have questions and things like that, and that's fine.
Now, when you mention your tech and how you added on, how you're even currently still building out your ways of harnessing the tech to work for you and your patients, did you have this is what I want my tech to do roadmap before you opened?
Not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Google Voice when I opened, and that is so unstable. And I did know that I wanted to have people to be able to reach me, but because Google Voice was so unstable, I wound up giving out my cell phone, my personal cell phone, which is fine. but I don't necessarily always turn off my notifications. So people would text me in the middle of the night. Like the pandemic really messed with everyone's circadian rhythm. So like I'll see spruce messages from people that are, it's like at 3 and it's like a random thought, right? So I don't feel the need to answer that at all. And I'd like, okay, note to self, talk about their sleep-wake cycle. But, like I just wanted people to have access, right? I have a ton of patients in my practice, like most DPC docs do, I think, that have been traumatized by our medical system, right? Who feel like they can't ask questions, they can't when they're anxious about things, they can't have someone to talk to. And so I want those people to know that they can access me, right? I tell people, this is an interesting experiment on my part, that my boundaries are mine to protect, like their boundaries are theirs to protect, right? And not to stereotype, but most of these people are therapists or in other helping professions. So they would do the opposite and not talk to you or call you or ask you things. And I want people to be able to get to me. And then I'll tell them, like, in the middle of the night, if you call me because you're really anxious about something, I will either say, oh yeah, you're neurotic, go back to bed. Or, oh, that's something we need to deal with tomorrow or the next day. Or you have to go to the ER, right? And I have no filter, so I tell them exactly in that same way. And like that, it is a relief to a lot of people. I do not get a lot of phone calls at night. I do get a lot of like random hint messages that could wait till the morning, except people are up at 3 a.m., right? But I did want people to feel like they could access me. Like your tagline on the podcast is at their fingertips. Like I do not want to be at people's fingertips.
Yeah.
But I want them to know that if there is something that they're worried about, I can be there and I will triage them appropriately.
I love that. And in terms of the fingertips, literally when I wrote that, I was envisioning my actual fingertips on a keyboard, because for me, amen to boundaries and amen to being able to be there for your patients and bring that sense of security to them. I mean, a lot of DPC patients, if not most of them, really understand the value proposition when it comes to accessing their physician. So I absolutely love that. But yes, even in my own practice, I tell my patients, if it takes more than 2 lines of text on Spruce, we will move this conversation to Serbo, or I will answer your message through the portal. Because the boundaries, especially when I'm so used to, as I'm sure you are, texting on our phones all the time for families, right, and for our personal stuff, it can be there can be a very big gray area when it comes to, and now we're going to add 300, 600, 1,000 patients to that. I totally think that is so important to think about, though, in terms of how you're saying access is so valuable, especially to marginalized communities might have had preventative care for decades because they could not access it, or they could not. And so that complete opposite experience of, I know Dr. Borgia, I love Dr. Borgia, Dr. Borgia is available, and literally I will send her a message, and knowing also that it won't affect your ability to live your life and get sleep, etc. But there's a beautiful balanced ground that we can find by using tech and making it work for us.
Exactly. So here's an interesting story. My implants, when they failed, I went to the oral surgeon, whatever, and she was like, okay, well, we have to redo this. Can you do it Friday? Okay, fine. I had a patient who is a therapist. I have a lot of therapists as patients. So I was going to talk to her about, I don't know, follow-up labs, whatever, at like 10. And so I wrote a portal message and I was like, look, I can't do this at 10 because now I have to go back to the oral surgeon. It does open up my afternoon though. And she wrote me back like, do not talk to me in the afternoon. You're just had surgery. You need to take care of yourself. And I was like, you are right.
Oh my goodness. And just, I'll put a little bit of a backstory here. Dr. Borgia was on a scooter. Am I correct? When you were on a scooter having the time of your life, and then you had an accident happen?
Yes. I blew out my 2 front crowns on a scooter in Washington, D.C. visiting our last of all of the MLB stadiums, I might add. So it's
That's
a pretty
awesome.
momentous
Oh my gosh.
occasion for me and my kid. And this is the thing that drives people crazy. So I fell. I took a header off the scooter, broke both those front crowns to the point where there was no returning them to crowns. And I need to get implants. And they failed, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to have teeth for a long time. But it was one of the most fun things I've done in so long. And I listen to my children who are always telling me, oh, you should do this with us. And I always prefer things like that. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. It was so fun. 5 minutes before the calamity happened, I thought to myself, oh my God, this is so fun. I should do more of what the kids are saying. And I don't regret it to this day. It'll be tens of thousands of dollars, and I do not regret it because it was so fun.
Oh man, what a story that's going to be passed on for generations. Oh my goodness.
Totally.
Oh my
I never
goodness.
freaked out because I stayed down for a long time and I was doing like a little survey, trauma survey. How are my wrists? How was my head? How's that and that? And they were like, oh my God.
I'm glad that you're in good spirits about it though, because that is the way we frame things it can be challenging sometimes. So now on that note, I want to ask about, as you've been open, what are some other challenges that you didn't foresee when you were planning your DPC that you had to cope with and overcome?
So I am a very socially anxious introvert, and marketing myself is horrible. I can advocate the hell out of anything for anyone else, but doing it for myself is terrible. So when I started, that was one of my biggest challenges. I did not want to write blog posts. I did not want to put myself out on things. When I hired those marketers, they made me do that Be Well Philly challenge, and I hated every moment of it. But I was able to actually make some money for a cause I truly believe in, the Abortion Liberation Fund of PA. Mm-hmm. And so having it framed like that made it a little bit easier. And I have fiercely loyal patients who told everyone to vote for me, right? So I made it to the finals. I did not win, but that was terrible. So marketing myself, I thought, was one of the worst things in the world, right? Luckily, I did not have to do it for long, and I don't need to necessarily do it now because I hit that magical point where it's all word of mouth. But that was the biggest challenges for me.
When you talk about this magic point where it was word of mouth, as you were getting there, even before this marketing came on, did you start changing how you approached marketing? I mean, even with that thread of being an introvert, did you continue to say certain things that were in alignment with your mission and your DPC that just came out easier the more you said them?
Yes. So the thing that came out easier for me was asking for money and telling people, like, this is what this costs, and not hemming and hawing. And so even things I did that I still do is pay what you can. So like I'll do medical marijuana certifications, and now I'll just be like, so my usual fee for this is whatever. I do this as pay what you can because I believe this is an interesting, weird gatekeeping thing that we do. And I do believe it's harm reduction. So you can tell me what you think that is, right? In the old days, Hint would just tell people and they could put the number in. So now I have to do it and make an invoice for them. So I've gotten very good at that. I've gotten really good at, I didn't have to do business because the pandemic happened and I didn't market to business, but I'm good at even talking to people about what their rate should be. This is what my normal rate is, and I want to make this something that is doable for you. And what I really don't want you to do is ghost me and not get care. So I want you to tell me a reasonable amount for you, right? That took a lot of practice. And it took a lot of saying it over and over again instead of like, oh, well, if you want to pay me this, right? So that was difficult and challenging, and I did it. And the other thing that was very challenging, but I do it and I still do it, is doing networking things. Oh, God, I hate those things. But I go with the least. So I actually, for Pride, I got a table at Philly Pride, right? There was the first Philly Pride for 2 years. And I wrote in it, I was like, I would like to share my table with Ally Wellness because we are both very introverted, socially anxious people, and we must sit next to each other. So we push ourselves to do this and we go to things. And I have a good friend who hypes me up for things. So awesome. I won a thing at the Phillies. The Phillies had this like hometown hero thing. And a friend of mine did it and sent a video in. And so he's really good at that. So I sort of am his date for things. So one of the things that's important is I do not go as selling myself. Like I'm me. I'm at a good place because I'm like, look, I'm me. I'm not for everyone. Whatever. I don't care. Right. I am who I am. I'm a fat, loud, cranky dyke. Whatever. Like me, don't like me. I don't care at this point. But I am here to serve a community and to advocate for a community. And I know how to do that really well. I've had years and decades of activism experience for that. So if I can network because I'm like, look, here I am. And all these people have trauma. All these people have medical trauma. And if they want to come to me, I can help heal that. My office is not like other offices, things like that. And so if I take myself out of the equation, like I'm not selling me, I'm selling my services. And that I can do.
So clearly your practice has found its community niche and you have done this Pride event in Philly. When you had as part of your ideal patient, as part of your core members of your practice, those who are in the LGBTQIA plus community, how did you come to have members of the LGBTQIA community as part of your core avatar, your core ideal patient?
So I've been queer for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. Probably lifelong, as they say. And I have been out since college, med school, right? My activism in med school was queer and reproductive justice focused. So I have been out for a long time, right? I do not have any issues with that, although I get where a lot of people could. And I'm very fortunate, come from a fairly liberal place. I went to a very liberal arts college. I lived in New York. So I did not have struggles like other people have, right? So being out has never been an issue for me. Being someone who queer people could flock to has also never been an issue to me because I'm out, right? And so people will come to see me. I've done trans care since I started in medicine in various different ways. And that has never been, there's never been a problem or anything like that. So in Philly, part of how this became one of my target populations was I did work at one of the major Philly LGBTQ health centers. And I did activism with a lot of other people to bring down some not great actors in that sphere. Yeah, it was very traumatic. And it's traumatic to this day because things are still going on. But I was known, actually, one of my patients was like, of course I trust you. You're the person who took down blah, blah, blah. So like I had a following before, right? So for me, it wasn't a big deal. There's a very active sort of social group, social media group, Queer Exchange Philly. And when I was even thinking about this, I put out feelers. I said, like, would you pay for this? Would you pay for people who couldn't do this? Things like that. So being competent in queer health was never like an issue for me. Being competent in trans health was never really an issue for me. It's getting those people to come in. And because it's a sort of oftentimes double or triply marginalized group, it's more an issue of access, right? Mm-hmm. So that has been a challenge, but it has not been an issue in terms of like bringing people on. In fact, I got someone on my wait list who was like, I was referred to you by said large LGBTQ health centers because their
Wow.
wait list was too long. And I sent it out there and I was like, oh my God, did they have a full turnover of staff, or am I no longer persona non grata?
It speaks to the brokenness of our system. And then you add a marginalized population to that. It's just crazy, especially in Philly. Like, I mean, I practice in a very rural community. So to have access problems, even in a large city, it just speaks volumes as to how broken equal access to care is in this
We're
country.
absolutely broken.
Yeah.
And also it speaks to how corrupt so many nonprofit industrial complex places are.
Amen to that. All I have to say is amen to that. I trained at a for-profit hospital, which blows my mind that for-profit and hospital go together. But then when I see the margins, the financial margins for the nonprofit hospitals, it blows my mind. Now, what about in terms of when you mentioned like Hahnemann's closing, Drexel's changing, this patient comes from the LGBTQ clinic because can't get in there, goes to your practice. What type of access do you guys have locally in terms of like hormone therapy, in terms of mental health? You said that you have a lot of therapists as your own patients, but I want to ask for your patient population, what's it like around Philly?
Behavioral health is one of the most challenging things, right? Every single person who's in medicine, who's in primary care, who's in DPC knows that we have no behavioral health care in our country, right? That's actually one of the biggest challenges I have now, where my business coach came in really well. So a very, very long time ago, I was at a Garrison Institute retreat. Garrison is like it's on the Hudson. It does meditation retreats and things like that. And I heard someone, I think from Bellevue in New York, saying, I practice impossible psychiatry. And that really struck with me, because I was like, a lot of times I practice impossible medicine. And that is where you are taking on these things that they are not ours to take on. Like the absolute terrible lack of behavioral health in our country cannot be my responsibility. Although, of course, we all feel that it is, because we see these people suffering in front of us. So I do not have an answer to that. It sucks here, just like it sucked in California when I worked there. Mm-hmm. It is unequitable, and there is so much systemic racism, bias, anti-poverty going on in that. I try really hard to get people into places that are sliding scale, but now I have the other side too, where I have all these therapists in my practice, and they cannot go on like they are also. So I don't have an answer to that, because that's a way bigger systemic issue than I can handle. That's actually where my business coach was pretty awesome. And there was a time we were talking, whatever, and she sends out these little like newsletters for things. Mm-hmm. And one of them was about time management, because part of what I was doing was like, well, what do I do? And I was particularly vulnerable because it was at a big COVID surge, I believe it was. So we were talking about that. And I was like, I just don't know what to do, because everyone is urgent, right? Like there were weeks I did not have a week where there wasn't a person in crisis, right? So we were talking about that, and she sent me this thing out. She's like, I'm going to use you for my newsletter. And then things happened. I think it was Ukraine and Texas banning gender-affirming healthcare or gender-affirming hormone treatment. And she changed the whole newsletter, and she said, time management is grief work. Swear to God, that has stuck with me like you would not believe. So like when you have impossible choices, what you are doing is grief work, right? I'm not going to fix everyone, because I can't, because I don't have the resources to fix everyone. That's not all of my problem, but it is my grief.
It just makes you think. It makes you think about how, coming off of Hint Summit, or just thinking about talking with people about how their communities are so broken when it comes to healthcare, the $60 ibuprofen tablets, the bankruptcy, and then when you paint that picture and then add it to what you just said about that time management is grief management, it really hits home. for me when I hear that.
Yeah. It was so funny because she sent me the first draft. It was like, I want, look at this and see. And I was like, well, I made little edits. And then the actual thing was, because all those terrible things happened, time management is grief work. And I was like, oh my God, you punched me in the gut. Because that is exactly what we're doing. And I try to think of that all the time now. Like, I have a lot of impossibly terrible choices to make for me and for patients, right? So our job is to make the least terrible choice, or to support people to get through to a place where they can make better sustainable choices. And that's hard. That's really difficult. And we need to acknowledge sort of the secondary trauma that happens to us, or holding that for us so that we don't burn out, right? Like, we all burnt out in corporate medicine. That's why we're all doing DPC, but it's very easy to burn out in DPC too, because you are practicing impossible medicine a lot of times.
One of the things I want to highlight, especially in your practice, was that you were quoted in a magazine where they were talking about how somebody, like during the pandemic, this was during the pandemic, where they were sharing the story of patients who were affected by dysphoria and mood changes and other changes because of not having consistent access to their gender affirming hormone therapies. So can you touch on, when you talk about you have hard decisions on the table and you have to choose what's going to be the best decision when you're dealt with a bad set of cards, how did your patients receiving hormone therapy get affected in your practice, and how did you guys navigate those waters during the pandemic up till now?
Well, people who were already members of my practice did not have an issue, right? Because we were together and we can do telemedicine and all those things. It was people who were going to one of the big systems. Like, one of the beauty of DPCs is being able to shift quickly. You can pivot, you can decide what's needed in the situation. So doing even telehealth, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, my pay what you can people, I swear to God, it was all people who could not get into their primaries, or the people who were doing their gender affirming hormone therapy for refills of those, and Zoloft. Like, Zoloft was the thing. No one could get in. They had no refills on their Zoloft, right? And it was amazing to me to see. So, like, gender affirming hormone therapy, and this is important to be said, it is not difficult, right? It's not complicated. Medically speaking, it's one of the most upfront, least complicated things that we do. Like, the idea of doing gender affirming care for someone, it is, medically speaking, not even difficult, right? We do so many more difficult things and make so many more complicated risk benefit analysis for, like, someone who has diabetes, right? The thing that happened during the pandemic was big systems were not able to pivot quickly, did not know how to do telemedicine, did not know how to do other things. We're so used to doing things in the way that they did things that people called, try to get refills, things like that, and they just couldn't understand how to do it, right? So a lot of my pay what you can people were people who needed Zoloft or other psych meds, and people who were unable to get their gender affirming care. And not difficult, right? I can look up their labs, I could do that, I could see what they're doing, and we're able to fulfill that need, right? And when you think about it, so someone who, say, is not trans, does not have gender dysphoria, things like that, like, the pandemic sucked, right? We all get that. Sucked in different ways for different people, and we all had a lot of stress and everything else was terrible, but we did not have that added stress of, like, oh my God, this thing that has been changing my life is now gone and I don't know how to get it. And, we all know how terrible it is to navigate the healthcare system, even as physicians, right?
Yeah.
So it was pretty fulfilling, actually, to see that you can fulfill this need for people that they thought was insurmountable, but we know is actually not that difficult, and have those things happen.
the next thing that I think about is when we have, who knows what's going to come in the future, but clearly access to care matters. Access to care is a huge value proposition to DPC physicians and their patients. But when we talk about the LGBTQIA plus community, one of the things I think about that I've mentioned to other physicians during this month of Pride is that when a person is wanting to find affirming care and they're looking on a website, they're looking, because that's our calling card for most of our patients, or social media. How do you look at painting primary care, which includes affirming care, hormone treatment for those people who are doing it? And how do you frame that visually? Like if a patient is looking for somebody and they're in the LGBTQIA plus community and they're wanting to find somebody who is affirming, what are things that a person should think about if they're developing their website to say, whether it be using the LGBTQIA plus term or something else, to say, this is a safe place to come? Because if you only have a moment where the social media crosses the feed or a person visits the website for 3 seconds, how would you encourage other people to think about how they're being presented in the public eye to create an affirming presence?
Okay, so there's 2 answers to that. One is how you appear to create an affirming presence. And the second is, are you actually creating an affirming presence, right? So the first one is, like we say for everything, make your office look inviting, right? Mm-hmm. So like I have a thing on my door that's like the Progress Pride flag, and I have things on my website that are pretty specific right up.
Yes.
Right, when you see it.
Yes.
It's easier for me though, because I'm a queer wolf person, all that stuff. But if you're not saying that this is something that you provide, I think saying that gender affirming care is primary care, because it really is primary care, right?
Yes.
That is very important. And so being very upfront in your website and all of your social media that you believe it is primary care, not in a passive voice saying like, we accept everyone, we don't discriminate, things like that, being like, yes, we affirm you, we believe this is primary care, we want to be the person you come to, in places that are really in danger of people and trans people who fear for their lives and their healthcare and all of that. Putting something up there, being brave about it, saying like, we support you, we believe in you, we want you to succeed, and we believe you are just as worthy of healthcare as everyone else, and we want to be that person for you. I think that would go a long, long way for people, right? I see a lot of queer people, right? But I'm in Philadelphia. There's a lot of queer access in Philadelphia. The people that I think I affirm the most are actually fat queer people. And so being upfront about that has really taught me how people who want to be affirming to queer people in other places in the country could be, right? Like, you want to be like, this is your home. I am your home. I'm your primary care home. I am the person that you can go to. It's all good. I'm telling you this. I hate social media. I hate all that. I let other people do it for me. Like, I have unbelievably fantastic patients, a lot of whom are authors also, who just like, one of my patients just wrote a piece for Philly Mag. So it's like in my feed and stuff. But like,
awesome.
Yeah, I know. Get to that point and then you have to do any marketing. Thank God. But like, you want to be the person that people think of when they see that, oh, there's a person I can go and I can trust and I know that it's okay.
And what about, like I went to Creighton. Creighton did not have that, to my recollection, training in the LGBTQIA medicine. And so when people are looking to learn more or like learn about how to strengthen their position as an ally, whether they're in the community or not, what are resources that you like to share with others?
Okay, so let's talk about the word ally first. Okay.
Mhm.
Ally is a term that allies use for themselves, right?
Mhm.
It is not like people who want to be allies, that's great, and you should. But what you want to actually try to be as an accomplice or a co-conspirator is actually the new word now. But that means that you are actively always trying to support a community or a cause, right? So ally at some point is like, oh, you want ally cookies, whatever. It's performative in some ways. So yes, I do want people to be allies, but I want them to be allies as a verb, not a noun, right?
Yeah.
If you want to learn more, and I recommend everyone learns more, because gender affirming hormone treatment and gender affirming care is one of the most satisfying things you can do in medicine. It's also way less complicated than a lot of other things we do in medicine. It really, really is. All of this stuff that people get like upset about and like confused about, things like that, are social things. Medically speaking, if you can handle a brittle diabetic, you will be overjoyed when you have a trans person come in who you're doing their gender affirming hormone therapy. Honestly,
Awesome.
it
It's
is.
awesome.
It's so lovely. It's so
Yeah.
affirming. Patients are so happy. So I would recommend, at the first thing I would do if you have no knowledge whatsoever about queer health or gender affirming health, is going to the Fenway site. I think I put a link to this, but they have an educational site too. And they have, like, you can get CME even. They have webinars, they have things like that, that you could go from the most basic to very complicated, right? I personally use a lot. I use the Fenway guidelines. I use the UCSF guidelines, which I sent you the link. And then the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, they are having their conference in 2022 in Montreal. In the fall, I am going. I think it'll be great. If you wanted to go to one of those things, you could. GLAMA, or the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, also has lots of great educational things you could go to. But I would start, if you are not doing anything at all, I would start with Fenway. And then I also use, surprisingly, a lot the Boston University guidelines. I sent you that link too. It's so like clean and simple and easy to look at. So if you want to see something that's not going to overwhelm you, I would start with that, because it's just like such a nice entree into everything.
And the links that you've mentioned will be on your blog accompanying this podcast. So thank you so much for sharing those, and even sharing about the conference in Montreal, because that's the first time that I've heard of it. So I'm sure that there are other people like myself in the audience listening that I have not heard of it before and might want to go. So that's wonderful.
It'll be great.
Now, awesome. Now, in closing, I want to just round back to you being a DPC physician, having experienced fee for service, having chosen DPC because of the community focus that you can build into your practice for your patients and yourself. But when you do talk to future DPC physicians, or just being aware that there could be a medical student or resident listening in the audience who is very much enamored with the idea, is still in that place similar to you were in the beginning, when you had that fear before your mom talked with you about just at least try, so you don't have the regret of not trying. What would you say to those people?
Just try. And if you fail, you fail, right? So a very important thing in my life, a very important person in my life has been Audre Lorde, right? DPC people probably don't know Audre Lorde unless you did women's studies or are queer, right? But one of the very important things that Audre Lorde said was basically, your silence will not protect you, right? So the point of your silence will not protect you is like, for everything that you speak those truths, and you do it for yourself, right? And like, this is a seminal essay by Audre Lorde. Is an extremely influential Black lesbian feminist poet. right? And because I did women's studies in the 1990s, she was one of the core people that we listened to, right? So this essay is actually, I think, the transformation of silence into language and accent, right? You hear this and you see it on bumper stickers and things like that says your silence won't protect you. And that has been a guiding principle for my life. It's gotten me in a lot of trouble, but you speak out for yourself. You do not speak out for other people, right? Like you're being silent when injustices are happening is never going to protect you as a person, right? And we know that history shows us that. So like she had said something, to paraphrase, like my silences have never protected me. Your silences have never protected you. You're never going to go anywhere if you stay silent about things. But if you speak out, you will find connection and you will find people. And even if you don't, you speaking out will be the thing that some other person hears, right? And so in queer communities, we know that intrinsically. Your coming out may not be for you, but it might be for the people who come out after you. Going to Pride this year really brought that home to me. Because I was like, oh my God, I'm an old lady and this is a super spreader event. And I don't want to do anything. But then I saw these young people with joy, dancing, things like that. And I just was like, oh my God, I remember myself in New York at Pride. And I had so much joy. And I was so happy that there was this community, right? So like you're speaking out and doing what you need to do, even if you fail, you are setting an example for other people. You're setting the example to be brave. You're setting the example that marginalized communities and medically disenfranchised communities count. And you are setting this example that you're going to live your life how you want it to be, right? So think about it in any terms of that way. If you're queer, I'm going to live my life with integrity and authenticity. If I'm a doctor, I'm going to live my life in a way that I know I make a difference in the world, and I am also making a difference in other people. And I am not someone who just clicks buttons and does weird metric things that don't mean anything. And then you continue on with that. So like, it seems very trite to say this, but be brave, find your people. Know that there are people out there. Like when I went to Nuts and Bolts, I really didn't think there was anyone out there like me who wanted to do DPC. And I found my people, right? They're my biggest support right now. And queer people know this from the get-go because we have our family and we have our chosen family. And find your chosen DPC family. It might not be in the big DPC group. It might not even be in one of the side groups. It might be a super splinter group. Like where I found my people, but you'll find your people and you will get support and you will have people that help you.
So powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Borgia, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Next week, look forward to hearing from Dr. Ashley Hendry of Mid-South DPC in Petal, Mississippi. If you want to hear more Pride episodes, check out the episodes aired earlier this month and also those aired in June of 2021. And if you haven't yet done so, subscribe to the podcast today and share the episode with a physician you may know who needs to hear about DPC. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify now as well, as it helps others to find all these DPC stories. Lastly, be sure to follow us on social media. If you're wanting to continue learning more about DPC in the meantime, check out dpcnews.com. Until next week, this is Marielle Concepcion.